What is a poltergeist? Is commonly referred to as a phenomenon associated with knocks, bangs, and a spirit. But is that really the case? Throughout human history, there are documented reports of this kind of activity. But in modern history, this has shifted a little bit. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Stay tuned. Hello, my name's Chastity, aka the Luminary Luna Beams.
And I'm Emily, the fine art medium.
And we're two mediums that specialize in the paranormal. Our purpose is to shed light on what goes bump in the night. That's why we call this podcast
Lights at midnight.
Lamp
Bing.
Bing. And that is Lamp, LAMP. Okay, Lights at Midnight podcast. Just so you know. But today, guys, we're going to talk about the topic of poltergeist. So we get a lot of questions. There's a lot of, I guess, information surrounding this, and it can easily get confused with other types of activity or entities. Honestly, it's a vast subject. So we're going to try to narrow it down a little bit for you guys today. So if you take a look at the meaning of poltergeist, you will see that it goes all the way back to ancient Egypt to the medieval times. There's stories throughout history of different things happening, ghosts knocking, banging, and they always associated it with spirits, demonic entities, witchcraft. But in 1882, the Paranormal Research Society was created. And honestly, I feel that has led to more definitions and different types of encounters throughout history. Poltergeist it's kind of hard sometimes because we have the movies and things, you have people on YouTube that show things moving around in their house.
I think with social media and just TV and stuff like that, it kind of makes it confusing of what these potential sources can be because you have people that say it's one thing and no one can really agree on what it is.
Yes. But over time, we have learned that it could actually be environmental factors that cause said poltergeist activity. So, having a poltergeist spirit versus having poltergeist activity versus, I guess you could say, thought form created poltergeist energy, there's just so many different things. So, that's what we're going to go ahead and talk about. So, really, the difference between poltergeist and poltergeist activity is commonly confused among just speaking it because people don't really understand it. So when you have something moving around your house, let's say you put your keys somewhere, you see them fly off the counter, or if something gets knocked over, people just jump to it being a spirit, and that's not always the case because there's a difference between having a poltergeist and poltergeist activity kind of under the same umbrella.
hmm And where you have one, it's like I feel like the whole poltergeist activity, I mean, for me, I call it PK manifestation, which is psychokinetic energy. And that's when things can move around, you can have sounds and stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an entity or an entity is causing it. But that's not saying that it isn't either, because you can have a multitude of ways or reasons in which this energy can manifest.
Absolutely. And a lot of times you can associate poltergeist activity to adolescence. A lot of times from our clients and just things that we've seen, around and everything, poltergeist activity can be associated with adolescents or teenagers because there's a lot of energy. We are energy. We create energy. Energy cannot be destroyed. It's only transferred. So, there's several factors in an environment. It depends, a lot of things, especially adolescent years. There's a lot of emotions, again, a lot of energy, and we can actually create things and make things happen. There's different ways through trauma, fear, just in general, having a ton of energy, especially a young person that may, what we consider, from our opinion, could have psychic abilities, or they've tapped into that and it's really strong. And in some cases, it can be a spirit. But a lot of times, the environmental factors is stress in the house, stress on an individual. To share a little bit about like PK manifestations, I guess you could say. My late mother shared a story with me at one point where she swears that when she was between the ages of like 12 and 14, that she'd be fighting with either her mother or her grandmother, because she had kind of a troubled teenage upbringing. And I think she was probably between 10 and 13. Yeah. And she said that and I mean, dead eyes, like, was not fabricating. And my mother had no reason to tell me otherwise. She's like, I used to just make the door slam really hard when I'd get really mad. I'd go sit down on my bed and make the door slam. And it was really strange. She only talked about it a couple times, which made it even more interesting. But to know that my mother was having those experiences, and one day I may tell you guys about the experience she had when I was in her belly, is quite interesting. But yeah, for my mother to have those experiences at that age, that's a classic example of poltergeist like activity and PK manifestation through our will and our emotions and stuff at that age.
Hmm. I don't think I've had many experiences myself. Just that time that you know about where I was vacuuming and something flew off the table.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've had that happen here in my home. We had a friend that moved in with us for about a month in our basement bedroom, and her family was here. There was a lot of children here, nobody in teenage years. And my friend and V were sitting in the living room, and all of a sudden, something just flew off the mantle. It's like a fireplace heater, so it has like a mantle, and it just flew right off. And during that time in the house, there was a lot of emotional transitions because they were in a place of need. And not to get too personal, but there was family issues, and in the months following, some things kind of imploded after that. So there was a lot of raw emotion. That's also another perfect example of a situation. I wish I could go a little deeper into that, but just you'll have to use your imagination, I guess. But having family issues and different things that shifted and happened, and like separation, I'll leave it at that, um, between that family. So it's another example of PK or poltergeist type manifestation.
Oh, I got one. How about fear and the fear of specific entities or paranormal activities that they're afraid of happening, but because of that fear, it's like they trigger it themselves.
Yes, 100%. And fear building over time. I know when we were doing the actual podcast version, Spirit gave me an analogy, which this can lead into another subject, which we're trying to cut off because me and Emily talked about it, where we just want to talk about poltergeist in this episode. But poltergeist and thought forms kind of go hand in hand. So that might be our next video, actually, when it comes to our educational videos. But yeah, so Spirit showed me that in our aura, where we create energies and thoughts, literally, thoughts are kind of leaked out into our energy field. That's how spirits are able to read our energy, is through that energy field. And basically, Spirit showed me how a poltergeist can be created in the similar sense, or the beginning stages. It's like a funnel into our energy field that creates like almost like a blob. I know, I wish I could do a picture of this, but it creates like a blob that kind of hangs out into our energy field until it's able to separate from us and extend out. Now, it's said this magnetic field, or this energy field that goes around our body, can project out 8 feet. Some people say 60 feet. Some people say it's infinite. This is all up to opinions and just things. There's no said evidence here, just to make that very clear. But once this energy separates, it has the ability, even without a consciousness or just like a conscious entity, to move things around the house as well.
Hmm. I've seen that happen, honestly. Like what you're describing, I've seen it around my neighborhood with some of the stories I've told you about people doing some substance abuse stuff and how it like pops off of them as they're doing that activity. Um, but I don't want to go too far into it because that is own subject.
Yeah, thought form that gets into the thought form
Yeah.
thing. We can share some stories about the thought forms we've seen because they've been kind of freaky. And if you have spiritual eyes to see the thought forms, then you will know. I will say this. As far as my intuitive gifts, if it is a poltergeist manifestation, a lot of times there is no form. For me, at least, there's no actual present form that you see with it. It's generally, if I see like dark energy, or sometimes people are static, their energy static, because I look into someone's energy when I read. And that's just the way that I do it. It may make sense to some people, it may not, and that's okay. The one thing that I've learned about doing this type of work is everybody sees things a tidbit different, but the it goes back to the core. There's some fundamentals that we have learned over time, and even though the paranormal, quote unquote, so unknown, it does still become predictable, which I find fascinating to a degree. To a degree, there's patterns, and again, one of the patterns of poltergeist is, again, trauma, fear, even in like a place. One thing that I did want to bring up, Emily, about your thoughts, do you, and I mean, I know my answer, but do you feel that poltergeist activity can actually stay in a spot even when the person that has caused that poltergeist type activity leaves?
If it separates from their body, yes. And but then it's kind of in that realm of if it's formless, because I've seen them formless, I still think they can still linger because it's an energetic imprint. We leave energy no matter where we go. So it's at the degree of like how far has it took shape and progressed into its growth as energy. So I would say no matter where it is in its cycle, I would say yeah, they can leave it behind.
Yeah.
It's like an energetic imprint. Think about it. You can have
Mhm.
residual hauntings. I mean,
That's what I wrote down. Can
yeah.
residual energy create a poltergeist? In my opinion, I agree with you. Yes, I think residual energy, even that's just been what I call it, the term that I created for it is called energy shedding. How we just like have these events that happen and they just leave an imprint. So it like sheds out that energy. And I personally think, and this isn't talked about, but I personally do think residual energy can actually create a poltergeist even after somebody's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because what I was saying before is like how poltergeist, how I was shown how it was created within our energy field. Um, that's just one way. One thing to understand is humans, we try to find like definite answers for things. And that's one of the things that I've done. It's not necessarily definite, but I'm a channeler. I ask for information about this stuff from my guides. I've been shown some wild things. So has Emily. And, it's not always definite, though. And we're reminded of that. It's a matter of perspective, honestly. And that perspective is based on our environmental experiences. And the same thing is applied to poltergeist activity. So there's no one definite way that it happens, there's multiple ways that it can happen, kind of like a web.
Mm-hmm. Faux shizzle.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the more, once this society was created, we have come a long way in paranormal research, and people get a lot of flack, including us. We got a lot of flack for our call-in video. I will say this, we wasn't dissing spiritualists, but from all the information that we could find, we offended some people about the Fox sisters. We're also spiritualists, I guess you could say, too. But they were proven to be, I'm pretty sure, could be wrong, don't quote me, they come out and said that what they did was fake. Not all of the stuff was fake, though. It was a very trying time for the spiritualist movement, and I feel like that kind of is coming back around. And I know this is a little off topic, but I do have to add the amount of skepticism that came after that big spiritual revival back in like the 1800s or the mid to late 1800s. History repeats itself, and eventually that I feel is going to come back around, and how we have these ebbs and flows of energies and these shifts and these waves. But one thing does stand true right now is that more and more people are having spiritual experiences and paranormal experiences. People ask what the difference is. For me, paranormal is, it can be anything, obviously not normal, right? But I do classify that into two separate parts. Spiritual experience for me, just for teaching purposes, spiritual experience for me is higher vibrational. Paranormal experiences for me, this is just for me, and the way that I teach is generally lower vibrational experiences. And that doesn't mean it has to be evil. Okay. That just means it's not in the realm of anything for our highest and best good.
One's more growth oriented. So now that we covered what pulse Jesus Christ, I so now that we pretty much covered what poltergeists are and what activity looks like, now why don't we talk about when you're noticing it and what you can do about it, especially if you're noticing a pattern of when it is occurring. So patterns of like your emotional state or the stuff that's going around in your environment, things that you have direct control over for the most part.
Yeah. Got to clean it up.
Mhm. Gotta clean it up. And this is where I was gonna say, and I always say this every single video, meditation is a great coping mechanism. You don't want to just like what's the best way to phrase it? It's like you don't want to bottle up emotions. You want to cope with them in a healthy manner so you don't explode.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way, it's a very it's a very physical manifestation. So on top of like meditating would be used to be able to cope with what you're doing, but also getting rid of everything in your life that no longer serves your higher purpose within reason, right? Can definitely help. And taking a physical approach, if you're having poltergeist activity in your home, is kind of what spirit's telling me like right now. That would be the best too, which we've talked about different types of spiritual practices and routines and clearing out that energy. It's okay if you're having tons of poltergeist activity, you're going to have to start clearing your house in some way, shape, or form. Of course, people use sage, Palo Santo, room sprays, candles, all of those types of tools. You can create the spiritual practice that works for you by setting the intention, because the poltergeist created by a person, okay, come from sloppy energy, I guess you could say, things that thoughts that run and just all that kind of stuff. Like really pulling yourself together as a whole and finding a way to cope with trauma, to cope with fear. And it doesn't help when you're having poltergeist activity, because the fear that you're having over the poltergeist activity continues to feed the poltergeist activity. In that sense, it's a creating of somebody there. So the person, you have to be able to identify the person that it could be coming from. So sometimes we've talked about like self, how a person can create it, but again, sometimes entities can create the poltergeist type activity. So a poltergeist can be created by a person. That's what we've mainly focused on. But the difference is sometimes beings or entity spirits can create poltergeist activity. And that's the dividing line between what a poltergeist really is versus poltergeist activity. So really, they're kind of one and the same, but they're not, because they come from two totally different sources.
And I mean, for teaching purposes, when I talk to clients, I refer to that type of poltergeist activity as PK manifestation that is caused from the entities. just so it's easier to tell the two apart. Because when you
Yeah.
start mixing terms together, then it gets very confuzzling.
Yeah. And psychokinesis or it's psychokinetic energy. That's generally when a person has the ability, like 11,
Yeah.
move objects on their own. But Emily's referring to the spirit actually using their energy to move an object. So generally, again, if you have a spirit in your home, it's going to definitely do more than a poltergeist would. Poltergeist is moving things around and around. You might hear knocks, bangs, things are flying off the shelves, things aren't where you left them. But if you have a spirit in your home, there's generally more signs to what could actually, be happening. You might have nightmares, you might see things out of the corner of your eye. And once you and again, we're going to talk about thought forms, but once you get in, your energy has developed into an unconscious entity, eventually it can get its own consciousness. Like it can kind of develop life inside of spiritual matters, and it can really grow large. You can have this in with a group of people too. Groups of people can create this energy, but generally the rule of thumb for us, we classify poltergeist activity as coming from environmental factors more so than spirits. There is a dividing line.
Yepperdoodles.
Yeah.
And when it comes from spirits, again, that's more the PK manifestation than it is poltergeist.
Yeah. From the spirit's energy,
Hmm.
not necessarily talking about the human energy. There's a difference, which we probably need a term for that too. But yeah, so if it is a spirit, to determine the difference, again, you'll have more problems. That you'll see something, you might have nightmares, you might have visions, you might have fluctuating moods that aren't associated with your own thoughts versus intrusive thought type stuff, which you can also actually have that by while creating the poltergeist activity as well. That's what makes this really tricky. Honestly, it does. But you can clean up poltergeist activity by changing your perspectives, creating your own spiritual routine and practices, and maintaining your mental well-being.
Hmm.
And sometimes it can't, it can be contained, but when it's other people in your life, the only thing you can do is encourage them to continue to strive to do better, feel better. And sometimes that's hard with teenagers. I have teenagers.
Hmm.
So it's hard, but there are ways to be able to maneuver around it. The main thing is just determining what you're dealing with.
Hmm. I feel like too, I mean, you said this earlier, but it's like you want to do some spring cleaning around you. So that does include people and habits and activities that might contribute to an overall negative well-being. So that can also include physical and mental activities. Um, so if you need to make boundaries, mental and physical boundaries for people and other things, it is highly advisable because boundaries are important and it helps maintain the overall cleanliness of your energy and the stuff that you put out as well.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, honestly, I think we need to stop there for today because as we talk more about this, my mind is entering thought form territory.
Yep.
So this is building a good foundation for poltergeist type activity. And the next educational video that we do will be thought forms. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, welcome. And if you enjoy it, please consider subscribing. We love and appreciate you all.
And guys, share. You need to share this video because when you do that, it boosts it in the algorithm. And then when it does that, that means it's going to put it out in front of more people's eyes. And then it's going to help people learn about this stuff. And yeah.
Yep, that's the whole point of this. Getting more back to our educational roots is the reason we started Lights at Midnight in the first place. That's super important to us. If you know anybody that may be having this issue, if you come across this video, please send it to them. So maybe they can learn something too. You can always go back to season 1, episode 1 through 30. We have some interviews, but a lot of it is teaching. So if you're interested in learning more about the paranormal or psychic abilities, it is there. But I think that is it for today. Much love and light. And until next time,
Peace out.
Hey, if you have a haunted story you want to share, you can email us at lightsatmidnightpodcast@gmail.com. Get in touch with us there. We'd love to hear from you. We really appreciate y'all hanging around and checking it out. And yeah, thank you so much. We are super excited to bring you some super awesome content. We really appreciate you guys checking us out.
Thank you to all that took the time to listen to this week's episode. Your support means the world to us. And remember, all of us have the ability to shine brightly and shed positivity, even in the darkest of places. Stay safe, stay well, and light it up!